Welcome to the Livable Law Method. My name is Juji Carminati, and I am really so thrilled and excited that you have chosen to start this course with me. The goal of the Livable Law is very simply to make the practice of law livable. That's it. And today, I truly intend to change your life. So let's jump in. The Livable Law Method is a methodology about how to manage your practice. It's not about managing cases, and we're going to get into why those two things are different. It is truly about managing the ebb and flow of your work. So let's start with this. Who is this class for? Well, it's for solo, small, and mid-sized firms, especially if they're looking to scale, or if you are already scaled, but you are dealing with the chaos, the difficulties and challenges, the time management problems that law firms are plagued with. I created the Livable Law Method in response to burnout and attrition and my own experiences litigating for over 13 years. And what I set out to do is to create a repeatable process and model that you can take into your own practice to fundamentally change the way you practice law. The Livable Law Method is a project management technique at its core, and it is based on agile project management. The thing about agile project management is that it is iterative, right? And that it does not have step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, end of process. It allows for returning back to the bases, returning back to drafts, returning back to problems, because that is how the law is practiced. So I took Agile Project Management and I developed a course and a book and an approach that uses that iterative project management system and applies it to the law. The Livable Law Method is people-centered. It is process-oriented. It uses agile techniques, and it is legal project management. The first thing I want you to learn, and this is going to require a paradigm shift, is the fact that managing litigation or managing a matter is not the same thing as managing the process of litigation or the process of managing that matter. Okay? Managing the matter is not the same as managing the process, because matter management is the what. What arguments are we going to make? What motions are we going to file? What strategy are we going to adopt? What witnesses are we going to call? What legal clauses are we going to incorporate? What approaches are we going to take to negotiation? That's the what. But process management is the how. Who is going to draft? When? Who is going to put together these exhibits? When? Who is working on what? What are all of these deadlines together looking like? What is our bandwidth looking like? How much work are we expected to be doing? How much is too much? How much is too little? That is process management. And that is what this course focuses on. There are 3 pillars in the Livable Law Method: management of tasks, management of time, and management of things. Each of those 3 pillars is then subdivided into 3 topics. So there are 9 topics total. But today, for purposes of this class, we are on pillar 1. And today we are going to look at deadlines, people, and accountability. So let's jump in. Deadlines. We all know them. We all live with them. We all live by them. So what am I going to tell you about deadlines that you don't already know? Well, let's start with this concept. Every time you have a deadline, There should be both an internal and external deadline to any piece of work that you are undertaking in your firm. I'm going to share a little anecdote. Very early in my career, I came home after an extraordinarily long day. I came back maybe close to midnight, after midnight, the middle of the night. And my husband was wondering, wow, what a long day, what happened? And I'm sharing my day and I tell him, oh, well, today was filing day. A filing day is always like this. And he says something that at the time I just brushed aside because what does he know about practicing law? He said, well, didn't you know the deadline was coming? What happened? Did you not know this day was coming? And I said, well, that's just not how it works, okay? That's just not how we do things. But 10 years later, I was thinking, is it the way we should be doing things? Maybe not, right? Okay, so what is an internal deadline? An internal deadline is real. An internal deadline is the actual deadline. When you are implementing the livable law method, you are going to get a little bit of pushback on this topic. And we're going to talk about this a lot throughout this course. The pain points, the pushback, the areas of friction within your team. Because I have experience implementing this in daily life with practice groups. And I know what it is that trips people up. And part of it is breaking bad habits. Right? Part of it is moving away from this paradigm of busyness and overwork. So this is the first time we're going to talk about this. The internal deadline has to be a real deadline. I've had this conversation with staff and attorneys and whoever. Sometimes they'll say, well, okay, well, the internal deadline's Thursday, but the real deadline is, the Wednesday after. And you have to stop people there. Whoa, no. That's the real deadline. And that's the real deadline because breaks on zip lines save lives. I'm going to tell you why I'm saying that. If you've ever been on a zip line, you will know that you start whizzing your way down the line, and there's a break, right, that slows you way down and basically brings you to a stop. And after that break section of the line, there's usually a pole or a tree or something that's holding up the zip line, okay? If that break fails, you die or you get really hurt. That break area, that's the internal deadline. That's what actually is stopping you on the zip line. That is what's keeping you safe. The internal deadline is what's keeping you safe. So the internal deadline is real because if you hit the external deadline with your work, it means you crashed into a tree or a pole. And we as a profession need to stop crashing into trees or poles because given the current state of our mental health, it's probably not working out too well for us. Okay, so now I've convinced you hopefully that the internal deadline is real. Let's talk about when it should be. Well, it has to be early enough to help. Okay, an internal deadline that's 24 hours before the external deadline, that's not a lot of break-in area, okay? 3 business days is the absolute minimum. When I was leading teams, 5 business days. And I mean it, 5 business days, unless you only have, maybe a 14-day window or a 7-day window, in which case we can shorten it. But we want it to be early enough that it actually helps. First, it needs to help by removing the stress associated with deadlines. 2, it needs to be early enough that if there is an emergency, if something terrible happens, there's not actually going to be a last minute effort, right? Because you still have 3 days or 5 days left to fix it, whatever it may be. And lastly, an internal deadline accounts for editing. I'm going to share another little story here. I was at the office very late one night and we were working on a draft. And I had turned in the draft several days earlier. And then the partner in charge takes the draft and starts working on it and prints it and makes edit on the hard copy. It was a while ago. And then hands me the hard copy. And then I have to make those edits. And then I hand it back to him. And on and on and on and on and on. We go into the night. Are you kidding me? Really? Because that's the day of the deadline and that's what we're going to do with the rest of our evening? No. That's it. You are now a livable law method person. We don't do that anymore. Not in our house. You need to create an internal deadline that accounts for the fact that there's going to be an initial draft, okay? And if there is going to be a review, a revision by somebody, it needs to account for that, 2 or 3 days for that. And then you need to give that person about 2 days to get those edits done, maybe longer if it's a really big document. And then you need to account for staff or a junior associate or whoever does this in your particular team to collect exhibits if those are necessary. And once those exhibits are put together, there's going to be a site checking period, and then there's going to be a review period. And if you're telling me, whoa, but that's a lot of time, I'm not changing the amount of time that work requires you to do. I am changing the way you are thinking about that time and actually providing for it. If it will take 8 working days to get this job done, then your internal deadline has to account for that. You're going to have an internal deadline for drafting, an internal deadline for revisions, an internal deadline for incorporating the revisions, an internal deadline for collecting the exhibits, an internal deadline for final review. And then guess what? Everything will be still completed 3 to 5 business days before your external deadline, which means that you are no longer crushing your team or yourself with absolutely unjustifiable demands. Item number 2, tracking deadlines. What do we mean by that? We just talked about internal and external deadlines, and it's great if you come up with them. But how do you keep track of them? Well, I can tell you how it used to be done, right? We used to have calendars when the motion is due for filing, which is only your external deadline. So maybe now you're thinking, okay, well, we'll create an internal deadline on a calendar, and then we'll have all the internal deadlines racked up on that calendar. Well, that is a recipe for chaos because our calendars are already overworked and overburdened as it is, and there is more about that in another lecture. But tracking deadlines has to be done as follows. First off, cardinal rule, tracking deadlines must be reduced to writing or a database that is not the calendar. There must be a place where somebody can look and have an immediate vision of all of the deadlines that are barreling towards them. Deadlines have to be updated in real time. No more of the, oh yeah, that changed, but we need to change that. No. There has to be somebody who is responsible for actually tracking the deadlines and updating those deadlines in the sheet. And if you're wondering, okay, how do I do that? No worries. I am literally going to give you the tool to track deadlines. And finally, whatever is tracking your deadlines needs to be accessible to all people at all times. This is a weird one, and I never thought it was going to be an issue until it became an issue, and then I thought, well, I guess it's an issue. Sometimes people who track deadlines for law firms, and that can be an attorney or a paralegal, it can be whoever is kind of like, queen of or king of the fiefdom, they have it locally on their desk and they feel perfectly good because they know where all the deadlines are. No more. No, we're not doing that anymore. It needs to be accessible to everyone at all times. We have the internet. You put it on a database or a website or however it is you guys manage your documents, but everybody has to be able to check into this deadline tracking document, and I'm going to tell you what it's called in just a few moments, at all times. It needs to be accessible. And here it is, the task matrix. Isn't she beautiful? She's beautiful. She's like the most beautiful thing. Okay. The task matrix is how you are going to keep track not only of tasks, but deadlines and who is assigned to those tasks. You are going to come out of this course with several tools. The big one, the big document-based one, is going to be the task matrix. And here she is. The task matrix can exist in an Excel spreadsheet, on a Google sheet, on a Mac. It's called Numbers sheet. I don't care where you put it, but it needs to be an Excel-based spreadsheet, and I'm going to show you why, because there's certain functionalities that are going to be very important for your practice. And it needs to be accessible to all people at all times. There are rules regarding the task matrix. I'm going to go through the rules, then I'm going to give you a demo of a task matrix, and then I'm going to come back to the rules, and the rules will make a lot more sense. Someone is always accountable. Someone is always responsible. There is always an internal deadline. There is always an external deadline. Internal deadlines are real deadlines, zip lines. No passive tasks. Every active matter has to have at least one task on the task matrix. The task matrix is updated in real time, either during meetings or by team members individually. And here is the absolutely beautiful task matrix. I made it up, right? This one is just for purposes of our particular exercise. But I will make it available so that you can download it and then repurpose it for yourself. Today we're going to focus on everything that's along the top of this. But right this minute, first, I'm going to focus on the matter, the task, and then we're going to jump to internal, external deadlines. And you see here it says RACI, R-A-C-I. This we will handle in just a few moments when we move into the next topic. So let's start with the basics. You will see here that my matters all have a very similar matter name structure. So that's the first thing you're going to have to do in order to take control of your practice, is to create a standardized way that people are going to refer to matters. That's usually pretty common, but especially if you're either starting out or you're scaling and bringing on people for the first time, you may be used to naming the matters a certain way that makes sense to you, and that's perfectly fine if it's just you. But once you start adding other brains to the mix, they need to be able to both name them and understand them as rapidly as you do. So it's a good idea to begin, or if you haven't done so, get into the habit of standardizing your matter names. Then you will see that there are tasks. The task has to be specific enough that people understand what it is. So for example, this, I'm going to write it here, draft motion, inadequate. What motion? About what? What? Anybody who has to look at this from anybody in the team needs to be able to understand what motion you're referring to. So we're going to go back to our much more complete description, which is a draft motion to compel discovery responses. Anybody looking at it is like, okay, I know what we're doing, okay? Now, we're going to jump down here all the way at the bottom. You see where my cursor is, because this is not how your task matrix is going to look, but this is how I populated it just for purposes of explaining the system. Okay. Here you're going to have RACI, and I've told you that we will come back to it. So right now, let's just skip it. And then here you have your internal and your external deadlines. Okay. And then you have some notes. If you really need to write some notes, we're going to write some notes up there. Here's a couple. This is why I wanted this to be in an Excel spreadsheet, because it has certain functionalities that are really important. The first one is this. You can actually sort by matter. Boom. Then I know all of the tasks that are coming up for this matter. That Carminati person seems to be very litigious. Galley. Then you have other clients with other matters. So this is one really, really helpful tool, because you can create your little to-do list just for that matter. Importantly, you can also go to your internal deadlines and put them in order. And that will give you a sense of what's coming up. And you can also start seeing if there's any traffic jams, right? So here it looks pretty good. You have something on the 4th, something on the 5th, something on the 6th, 8th. No, here on the 10th, you have 3 different tasks. So let's go look here who is actually going to be responsible for doing the work. Sarah is going to be doing the work for this particular revised cease and desist letter. But then Eric has to do a motion for sanctions, and he has to have a meeting with a client. And we will talk about how to manage that, but that doesn't seem too onerous, but it's still worth noting. Then you're going to gear on the 20th. There's only 2 tasks and it's 2 different people, so everything looks great. And you move on, you go like that, so on and so forth. And this is a really effective way to look at your upcoming deadlines for the entire firm, which is fantastic, right? Another thing you can do is that R stands for responsible, which is the person who's actually going to be doing the work. And you can actually sort it by person too. So if I were Juji, for example, just picking a name out of a hat, and I would say, you know what, I want to get a sense of what my to-do is. Boom. I can select those 3, copy paste them, take them away, or use this spreadsheet. That would be the ideal thing. But I could look at the spreadsheet and be like, oh, yeah, okay. So I have this on the 5th, this on the 20th, and this on the 30th. That's not too bad. I can handle that. So this is why I really encourage folks to use a task matrix in an Excel spreadsheet and to have it accessible to everybody. I think one of my happiest days implementing the Livable Law method was when we were headed into a Scrum meeting, which I will tell you what it is in a few moments. And I was in the task matrix trying to get organized for the meeting, and I saw everybody else's cursors in the same matrix. I saw them just like moving around, and I thought, oh my God, we have arrived. They're actually using it. And that was just a fantastic moment. It's one of my happiest moments as a project manager. All right. So these are the basics of the task matrix. Now let's talk a little bit more about tasks, right? Let's go here we're going to reorganize them by case. And here under tasks, you will see, for example, it's exactly what I was talking about earlier, but I want to show you in practicality what it looks like. My first task, draft a cease and desist letter. Juji is responsible for writing this. Great. And then there's revise the cease and desist letter. Remember what I said? Account for editing? Okay, well, how do I do that? So the external deadline is that we have decided that we want the cease and desist letter to go out. Okay, how do we know that? It's just a letter. There's no real deadline, right? We know there's not a deadline to get a cease and desist letter out most of the time. Well, this is where the matter owner, the partner in charge, the attorney in charge says, I'd like it to be out by next Friday, next Thursday, whatever it is. That's your external deadline, right? That's the deadline the team has set to get this out the door. All right. But now immediately, because you are now learning about this, you'll know, okay, well, that doesn't mean the letter's ready on that day. That letter is going to have to be ready at least 3 business days, if not 5 business days before that date. So what do? We say, okay, well, the external deadline is going to be on the 16th, and it's early enough in the month. So let's say that the internal deadline is going to be on the 5th of October. Great. But then Juji has to send this letter to Sarah to revise and finalize it. So that's going to be on the 10/10. That means that there are 5 days for Sarah to receive and review the cease and desist letter. And we're still 6 days out from the external deadline. Now, this is easy. This is a letter. It's probably not going to be super complicated. Okay, let's look at something a little bit more complicated. An amended complaint. All right. So we know that Juji is going to draft the amended complaint, and the external deadline is November 15th. But we are going to have an internal deadline for the first draft of October 20th. It's an amended complaint, okay? Let's say it's not huge edits. At that point, Juji is going to hand over this particular task to, and we're going to jump down a little bit, down to Sarah. See? And Sarah, and I know it's a little confusing because her name appears twice. I promise I'll explain that. But Sarah is going to be sending her edits for the amended complaint by October 25th, which means that we have given Sarah, or Sarah has requested, 5 days to get through the edits for the amended complaint. Once Sarah is done with the amended complaint, she's going to send it back on the 25th to Juji. And here we are. And Juji then has 5 days to finalize the amended complaint, which takes us to October 30th. Look at that. Fantastic. Now what happens after that? We're done. We finished the amended. No, we are not done. Somebody has to assemble exhibits. Okay. Well, Olivia here is going to assemble the exhibits. And she is going to do that by November 6th of 2023. And notice that we are still 9 days out from the external deadline. Then Olivia is going to proofread and site check the amended complaint. That is a different task. And she will have 2 days to do that. Once she is done, there is going to be a final read through of the amended complaint by Sarah. And here's the final read through. And it will be done and dusted by November 10 of 2023, which still gives us 5 days before the external deadline for the amended complaint. Imagine if all of your tasks were broken down that way. You would be able to track who is doing what, when, And people would be able to communicate about the fact that they only have 3 days, they really need 4, or they had 3, they did it in 2. And then you would shuffle down your deadlines to make way for that, or not. People would just have a little bit more time built into their schedule. This is one of the key utilities of the task matrix, is that it allows you to have much more transparency and situational awareness and a lot more control over the process of completing work. Remember, this is not about the what. This is about the how. How are we doing this work? I did this again under here, draft motion to compel discovery responses. Turns out Eric is now responsible for doing this, and he will be done by October 4th of 2023. And then this is going to be apparently a much shorter motion. We only think that after that, Olivia has to assemble the exhibits. Maybe it's a shorter motion. It's easier. We don't have to do all of the other steps after that. But we will know that it will be done by October 6th of 2023 with an external deadline of October 10th of 2023. So what are we doing? We have properly managed everybody's bandwidth and accounted for what everybody was doing. This is my introductory lecture to the task matrix, and I really hope that you will choose to begin incorporating it into your work. Now let's talk about how we're going to write these tasks. If you see, the ones that I've covered with you so far are pretty active. We know what people are doing. You're finalizing the amended complaint, you're assembling exhibits, you're proofreading and site checking, you're doing a final read through. Okay, we understand what that means. Look at this. Waiting for response from OC, from opposing counsel. That's not a task. And unfortunately, you're going to see it show up. And in fact, people are going to report as that's a task. That's something that they're doing. That's not doing anything. Waiting for a response from OC is not doing anything. What you could do is check in for response from OC. We're going to say that maybe Eric has to be doing this. Sarah is accountable. I know. I will tell you what all those means in just a minute. So the person to be conferred with is OC, opposing counsel, because you want to reach out to them. And you're going to tell yourself, okay, well, look, I'm going to provide myself that they're going to do this by October 5th of 2023. And the external deadline might also be October 5th of 2023, because there's no actual external deadline for that task, right? The external and the internal deadline are the exact same in this particular case. But this way, we're not just waiting for something to happen. There is an active task to be performed at some point once enough time has gone on. Waiting on court order. That is similarly a very passive task. What are we doing? It's not a task at all. So instead, what we're going to do is maybe you're going to go call court to check on order. And I know it's not a popular thing to do. So we're going to say that Olivia is going to have to do it and that Juji will be supervising her. I gave it a little bit away there, right? What accountable means. Juji is going to be supervising. And we're going to put it way out. Look, by 12/15/2023, and our external deadline is 2023. But you know what you could do in between? This is actually a helpful one. You can insert one above and be like, you know what we want to do in between, by the way? What we'd like to do is send client an update reorder regarding order, whether it's been issued or not. And we're going to have Olivia do this as well. Juji will be supervising. Give it away again. Now you know what that means. And this is going to be a little bit sooner than that, right? Let's say by 11/15 of 2023. The external deadline is 11/15 of 2023. And then look what I did. I missed it right there. The client is the person that's going to be conferred in because they're the third party that needs to be communicated with. You see that? That's a lot more active. Okay. Now, let's say that we're going through these and you're like, oh, you know what? I finished this task and I finished this task. So we got the initial client meeting done. Fantastic. So I'm going to remove it from the list. And then we done. We signed the fee agreement. We got it from the client. Great. We're going to delete it. I've just committed a cardinal sin. That is not proper task matrix behavior. What you want to do at that point is say, okay, hold on. We got a signed fee agreement. That's fantastic. We did the initial meeting. Great. What are we doing next? Is case closed? No. Cases are not allowed to fall off the matrix unless they're closed. That is a cardinal rule. And that is one of the advantages of sorting them by matter right here, because then you can see if this is the last task for this matter on here. So let's just say you got the signed fee agreement from the client and you went ahead and did the initial meeting. And so maybe the first thing you're going to do is you're going to write a conferral letter to opposing party, to OP. And we're going to say that Eric is responsible for doing this and that Sarah will be supervising it. And we don't necessarily need to confer with anyone or keep anybody informed. I gave away what the I stands for. Did you notice that? Okay. We will get into it more later on. And now we're going to say, well, we already did everything else. So we're going to say that our external deadline is 10/20/23 and our internal, and no, you can't do that, right? Why? Because you're drafting something. It's going to take a while. So if my external deadline is 10/20/23 and we want to have a letter done before that, let's say that Eric can send this out without any additional review. Like he's experienced enough. Sarah is supervising, but she doesn't need to look at it. Okay, that's okay. Then we're going to roll this back a little bit. And we'll say, okay, 10/15/2023, that's when he's going to do the conferral letter. You see, now Smith Analytics is back on the task matrix. We never let a case roll off the task matrix. Cardinal sin. And here we are back to the rules, which I told you we were going to go through together. The task matrix rules are said that someone is always accountable. Someone is always responsible. So there's always somebody assigned to do the work, and there's always somebody assigned to supervise that work. There is always an internal deadline. There's always an external deadline. Internal deadlines are real deadlines. There are no passive tasks. Now you know what that means. Every active matter has to have at least one task on the task matrix, and the task matrix is updated in real time, either during meetings or by team members. Now let's talk a little bit more about setting deadlines. Deadlines are real. What does that mean? Look, internally, it may be that someone tells you, look, I know I have to get it to you by Friday. It's not going to happen. It needs to happen by Tuesday. And that's okay. First of all, we need to destigmatize that happening. It's okay. If you're dealing with somebody who is a responsible person, it's okay. If you're dealing with someone who's not a responsible person, getting mad about that is truly getting mad about the wrong thing. This person should not be doing the work, period, right? But the question that comes up when that happens is, okay, well, why did we set the wrong deadline? What happened to your schedule, your bandwidth, your availability, your workload that caused this shift? And it's not about blaming. It's about understanding that there must have been a mismanagement of time and not taking into account a person's availability. And that's really important. And again, that is something that in the law we are very bad at. There's this idea that we just need to go and break ourselves for the practice of law. No more. No more. We are creating a system here, you and me, doing this course. We are creating a system where it is okay to prioritize people's mental health and needs, period. Setting deadlines, when you do so, have to be real. And if there is a need to change them, the question has to be, what did we do or what happened that has caused this shift? Sometimes it can just be cases happened, stuff happened. That's okay. As I said, the whole point of using the Agile project management system is that it is iterative and dynamic. That's why we're using it. Real deadlines have to be certain. What I mean by that is if you saw in the task matrix, none of the dates are just a month and a year or a month. No, there is a date. There is a date certain where all of these things have to be done. You want an actual date. And when we say that day, we mean close of business that day. And we will talk about this, but I don't think you're going to be shocked to hear it doesn't mean midnight that day. It does not. It means close of business on that day. And then these deadlines need to be realistic. There needs to be real conversations about how long it takes to do stuff. And I go a lot more into depth in a separate course regarding the second pillar of the livable law method. But for now, let's talk about the fact that people have to have the freedom to tell you how long it's going to take them to do something. And that it is unrealistic for folks who either have not done this ever or have not done it in a long time to tell them, well, I think emotion only takes 2 days. Well, that's nice. So write it yourself. But if the person that you're assigning it to tells you, well, I need 4, then that person needs to have 4 days, because then that is a realistic deadline and it is real and it is something that they can abide by.